carrying a worn sack. She entered a bank and requested her office, prompting laughter, until they viewed the documents capable of causing significant damage. She proceeded with a familiarity suggesting repeated visits. There was no uncertainty, no faltering, just a deliberate, measured pace. Odessa Bell Jenkins, 74 years old, with skin resembling dried tobacco leaves and eyes as keen as glass, opened the door to Hamilton First Bank in downtown Modesto. Initially, she attracted no attention. The air conditioning created a distracting hum. The sound of phones filled the air, and fingers moved quickly over keyboards. Odessa was not in professional attire. She wore a faded blue dress, worn orthopedic shoes, and a wide-brimmed straw hat reminiscent of a 1960s Sears catalog. A well-worn canvas sack, marked with hand-stitched initials OBJ, was slung over her shoulder. She moved to the center of the lobby and paused. "Excuse me," she stated, her voice calm and easily heard. "I require access to my office, please." The young teller stationed at window 2 did not acknowledge her. "Madam, if you're here to make a deposit, you'll need to take a number." "I am not here to make a deposit." He looked thin, as did the woman beside him and the assistant manager near the back. The silence that followed was not heavy or dramatic. It was simply awkward. Everyone seemed to expect her to explain herself, and she didn't feel any rush to do so. "You said your office," the teller asked, clearly confused. Odessa nodded once. "Top floor, behind the frosted glass. Used to be my grandfather's. I'm here to retrieve it." That's when the laughter began. Initially, it was subtle, originating from a young woman close to the counter. Then a cough, someone attempting to suppress it by clearing their throat. The security guard lifted an eyebrow and moved forward from his chair. "You own this bank?" The teller inquired, now smiling. "Ma'am, this is Hamilton First. It's a corporate bank, not a diner. Are you certain you're in the correct building?" Odessa didn't blink. Instead, she placed the sack from her shoulder and carefully set it on the tile floor. The zipper was stiff due to years of dust, but it opened silently. A folded birth certificate emerged, along with a stack of parchment-colored documents, and a glossy black and white photograph depicting a black man in a double-breasted suit shaking hands with a white man before a building strikingly similar to this one. Following this, she placed a single page, formerly framed and now laminated to preserve it against age. At the bottom, in fading ink, was a signature that remained legible, E.H. Hamilton. The lobby fell silent. The teller bent closer, examining the page. His complexion drained. The assistant manager advanced, his gaze fixed. "Where did you obtain these?" he inquired. "My grandfather gave them to me," Odessa responded. "Before he passed, he instructed me to safeguard them. He said the world would forget. But paper remembers, ma'am. This simply cannot be genuine." Odessa inclined her head. "Do you have a legal department? Perhaps you should contact them." The manager, Mr. Lyles, emerged from behind the counter, his name tag clearly visible. He appeared older than the others, likely in his mid-50s, with thinning hair and a shirt that strained to the buttons. "Let's go somewhere private, Miss Jenkins." "Odessa Bell Jenkins." "Miss Jenkins, if this is some kind of mistake, it's not. And I prefer we talk up there." She indicated the top floor behind the glass panel, the same one she'd mentioned earlier. He paused, looking around. Finally, he offered a small nod to the security guard. They would take her to the conference room. They led her past curious stares and side glances. Odessa walked slowly, unbothered. She did not gloat. She did not explain herself. Her sack bounced lightly at her side with every step. She was not there to prove anything. She was there because something was overdue. But before they reached the elevator, someone asked a question that changed the temperature of the room entirely. "What's in that bag?" inquired Lyles, the assistant manager. His voice attempted composure, though his eyes betrayed his concern. Odessa paused, turned toward him, and regarded him as if anticipating the question since that morning. "Proof," she stated plainly. "Proof that this place doesn't belong to who you think it does there." The atmosphere in the third-floor conference room felt constricted. Perhaps it was the low ceiling or the windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. Or perhaps it was the silence that fell between them as Odessa emptied the rest of the sack onto the long table. She didn't handle things carelessly or make a display of it. She placed each item deliberately, one by one. Original land deeds, typewritten stock certificates with embossed seals, correspondence between her grandfather Elijah Jenkins and Ernest Hamilton, the bank's namesake. Some pages were brittle, faded. Several others possessed markings that appeared newly imprinted. Lyles observed the stack. His mouth slightly opened, but he remained silent. Odessa retrieved a paper from the middle and pushed it towards him. She advised, begin with that. He grasped the document carefully, as if it were fragile. His gaze quickly scanned the words. Transfer of controlling interest. It was signed in 1957 by Elijah Jenkins. What is this? He asked. The true ownership, Odessa explained, prior to Hamilton's involvement with Western Consolidated. My grandfather held the largest stake, yet the original name persisted. Records were manipulated to remove any trace of him, a highly improbable event. The Jenkins name doesn't appear in our records, she stated, shrugging. Not all information is archived when individuals desire its suppression. Lyles massaged his temple. Are you suggesting your grandfather owned this bank? What motive would he have for concealing that? She replied, he wasn't hiding anything. He was forced out under unfair conditions. Shares were promised, but never officially registered. The merger in 1974? That was simply a more complex term for theft. The assistant manager began to protest, but reconsidered. He then retrieved his phone and activated the screen. He announced his intention to contact corporate headquarters. Odessa showed no reaction. She deliberately placed the final document, a notarized affidavit signed by Ernest Hamilton, acknowledging Elijah Jenkins as co-founder and majority shareholder in the original charter. Lyles avoided eye contact, moving back and forth as the phone connected. This is Joseph Lyles at Modesto Branch 142. We are experiencing a situation. A person is present, asserting ownership, rights tracing back to the founding. Odessa's hand rested on the table. She was present to wait, not to argue or beg. They possessed documents. Originals. No, I am not joking. He listened, his eyes shifting back to her. Okay. Yes, I will secure the room. He ended the call a minute later. Regional Legal is dispatching a team. They anticipate arrival within a couple of hours. Odessa nodded once. We are also retrieving the historic records from the vault downstairs. Lyles added, if this is genuine, they'll want everything clearly presented. She smiled faintly. You should have prepared that information years ago. An hour elapsed, then another. During that period, Odessa spoke infrequently. She primarily gazed out the window, occasionally taking sips of water brought by a nervous intern who remained silent. However, activity was underway downstairs. Those who had scarcely noticed her before were now murmuring in hushed tones, discreetly looking towards the conference room window as if it held a disturbing event. In reality, it wasn't a crime, not in the manner they envisioned. However, what Odessa presented was more than just documents. It carried significance. It represented history, memory, and ownership. Certain individuals within the building were beginning to sense its impact. Yet, the true tremor didn't stem from what she had already displayed, but from what remained unseen. When the regional legal team from Sacramento arrived, consisting of 3 men in sharp suits and a woman carrying a briefcase seemingly heavier than Odessa's sack, a palpable tension filled the room. Odessa remained seated, her composure unwavering, with her hands folded in her lap as if awaiting Sunday service. Bryce Hanley, the lead attorney, bypassed introductions altogether. He placed his leather-bound binder on the table, offering Odessa a half-smile, which was polite but lacked sincerity. We understand you're claiming part ownership of this bank, he said, already flipping through her documents as if they were museum artifacts. I'm just here to verify and advise our client on next steps. Odessa didn't flinch. I'm not claiming anything. I'm here to reclaim what my grandfather built. Hanley glanced at Lyles. We'll need copies of all this. Originals can't leave the premises, but we'll digitize them for analysis. Odessa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she retrieved a folded letter from her purse. The paper showed creases, and the ink had bled slightly at the edges, but the signature at the bottom was legible. "This is from Elijah Jenkins," she stated, placing it before them. "He composed this in 1961, noting his fear that someone would take what belonged to him. And they did." Hanley read the letter, then gave it to the woman next to him. "You want us to believe your grandfather was forced out of his own bank without anyone taking notice?" Odessa's eyes narrowed just slightly. Nobody seemed to want to investigate. "Do you believe those initial shareholders maintained accurate records?" The Jenkins family lost their majority ownership and became essentially irrelevant within less than 10 years. And the question of how went unasked, because there was a general lack of interest. "We weren't the kind of family people erected monuments for." Lyles subtly adjusted his position. "But the Hamilton name. Elijah and Ernest were partners," Odessa pointed out. "They established this place in the 30s, but only one of them received recognition. Can you guess who was included in the historical accounts?" Hanley scratched the back of his neck. "Even if all of this is true," he said, "you need to prove continuity of ownership. Paper trails, tax filings. They're all in that sack," Odessa replied. "I've been filing claims with county officers since I was 28. Every year, every decade, even after my husband died, quietly, patiently, because my grandfather told me one day the truth will be heavier than the lies." The room fell quiet. Selina Miles, the junior attorney, glanced up from a typed ledger. "This is considerable. Where did you locate some of these?" "In a church basement. In my uncle's attic. In city archives that were unaware of their contents. I dedicated the majority of my retirement to compiling it all." Hanley's smile had vanished. He tapped his pen on the table. "Do you realize this might initiate a lawsuit?" "I anticipate it," Odessa replied. Her voice held no pretense, only certainty. She wasn't present seeking assistance. She came because she possessed documentation. Lyles, who had remained quiet previously, advanced forward at last. "Miss Jenkins, why at this time?" Odessa hesitated before responding. "Because you all ridiculed." She stated it without malice. Simply a statement of fact. "I entered with a past that no one felt the need to recall. I observed the name Jenkins removed from each annual report, each plaque. For years, I convinced myself it was unimportant. But this place? It's constructed upon what my grandfather initiated, on what we forfeited. After all these years, after all the waiting, I figured it's time someone remembered." Hanley rubbed his eyes. "We're going to need to bring in senior counsel." "Good," Odessa said, sliding the last sheet across the table. "They'll want to see this." It was a black ledger, smaller than the rest, handwritten in tight, neat lines. "Ernest's private account book," she said. "Found it in a box marked receipts in a retired accountant's garage in Madeira. This document details every transfer, every dividend, every instance Jenkins' shares were reallocated without our consent." Hanley appeared visibly stunned. Selina reacted by covering her mouth. "Are you saying this was concealed?" she asked. "No," Odessa replied. "It was overlooked." Which is more concerning. As the attorneys examined the ledger, none of them noticed what Odessa observed through the glass. The face of someone documenting everything with their phone, positioned just beyond the door. The video had already been sent to the incorrect recipient before anyone in the room realized. A bank employee, appearing young, possibly 22, with their name tag turned away, had briefly paused outside the glass, observing 30 seconds of Odessa's quiet revolution. A woman with a lined face and a ledger, steadily turning through years of obscured facts, was visible. Inside, Bryce Hanley peered at the document before him, as if it might ignite. The contents of this ledger significantly altered the situation. Odessa remained silent. She allowed the pause to linger until another person interrupted it. It was the assistant manager, Lyles, his voice raspy. "That's Ernest Hamilton's handwriting." He continued, "We maintain samples for verification." "That's his," Selina confirmed. "And these aren't merely notes. They represent unauthorized adjustments. Dividend transfers, forged proxy votes, even ghost shareholders." Hanley reclined in his chair. Access to internal systems must be suspended until we fully assess the scope of this situation. The board will require a complete overview of everything. Odessa reacted with a slight head tilt. He disregarded her comment that the board would be accountable for the repercussions. How did you obtain this? I inquired. I contacted the relevant individuals, he replied, through personal visits and correspondence. Most people were either unwilling or unable to cooperate, either due to age or a sense of guilt. However, a retired CPA, Douglas Nunn, residing in Madeira, retained records that he was never instructed to destroy. Hanley wrote in his notebook, a sense of frustration beginning to surface beneath his professional demeanor. Potential corporate liability, a breach of fiduciary duty, and misrepresentation of historical records were all possibilities. Odessa interjected. And theft. The word resonated sharply. It hadn't been described that way previously, she explained. They had simply referred to it as a rebranding. But altering names and concealing origins is still theft. Selena examined the pages. Evidence was apparent. There were old checks, fabricated board minutes, and missed filings during the consolidation years. The regional director appeared abruptly. Her name was Diane Cole, in her late 40s, wearing a red blazer with hair styled sharply. She entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority. Brief me, she stated, her gaze already surveying the room. Hanley rose. Miss Jenkins provided a comprehensive record of family ownership history originating from the bank's inception, including this ledger, private accounts, and probable Hamiltons, which indicate unauthorized share transfers. Cole handled the ledger as if it were fragile. She quickly reviewed the pages, then paused at a folded page. Her expression showed concern. Could this be genuine? Odessa met her gaze directly. You decide. Cole sat down, placed the ledger to the side, and folded her hands. Miss Jenkins, should this prove to be as it seems, it may initiate state inquiries, possibly federal ones. Do you grasp the magnitude of the situation? I do. I'm familiar with it, having dealt with it for decades. Cole addressed Hanley. What is our potential liability? He paused. If this ledger is verified, and verification is anticipated, the repercussions extend beyond public relations. It involves shareholder fraud, a false portrayal of history, and likely a pattern of financial discrimination. Notification of regulatory agencies may be necessary. Lyle, who had been silent until now, murmured, we could lose the charter. Odessa finally moved forward. I didn't come to dismantle it, she stated. I came to ensure its integrity. They regarded her with disbelief. Do you believe I desire your positions, your authority? She questioned. My grandfather didn't establish this place for me to destroy it. However, I will not permit it to be sustained by falsehoods any longer. Cole nodded deliberately. You're not requesting a financial contribution, are you? He asked. No, Odessa replied. I'm requesting that my family's name be restored to its rightful place, on the records, on the wall, and on the founding documents. If that isn't possible, I will pursue legal action through the courts. For a brief silence, no one stirred. Then Hanley rose. I'm going to contact headquarters. He continued. I believe we should cease acting as though this is merely a misunderstanding. Selena carefully collected the papers, treating them with the reverence due to historical documents. Outside the door, phones began to illuminate. The news had circulated. A local reporter was already downstairs inquiring about the elderly woman asserting ownership of the bank. Cole glanced out the window, then turned to Odessa. Do you feel prepared for this to become difficult? Odessa offered a slight smile. Darling, I have endured hardship. I am ready for authenticity. While the building prepared for legal challenges, Odessa sensed a more profound consequence, as justice often resonates beyond legal proceedings. As the sun set behind the office buildings in downtown Modesto, the news had already escaped the bank's confines. A journalist from the Valley Record waited outside the glass doors, equipped with a notepad and a camera. Her name was Eleanor Cruz, mid-30s, with a blunt haircut and a direct manner. She had not been assigned to the story. She arrived alone, having heard rumors from a cousin employed in the building. Within, people behaved differently. Staff who had previously dismissed her were now quiet, quickly passing documents between offices and avoiding Odessa's gaze. Others, primarily younger tellers, regarded her with a peculiar sense of wonder, as if they were only now understanding they might be working in a building constructed upon someone else's misappropriated narrative. Cole stood near the windows, arms folded, observing the unfolding events as if they were a chess game she hadn't anticipated playing that day. "She's going to want a statement," she said, nodding towards the reporter. Odessa didn't raise her head from her seat. "Let her in." "Are you sure?" she responded. "Let her in," Cole repeated. "I'm not hiding." Shortly after, Elena entered the conference room, her camera hanging from her shoulder, the recorder already running. "I'm told you have evidence this bank doesn't own what it claims to own." Odessa remained steadfast. "I have evidence to show it always has, not entirely." "And who are you?" "Odessa Bell Jenkins, granddaughter of Elijah Jenkins, the man who helped establish this institution and was erased from historical accounts, not even receiving a footnote." Elena positioned herself opposite her. "That's a significant assertion." "It is not an assertion, but a documented history," Odessa stated. "All the necessary information is on that table." The reporter looked to Cole. "Is this being given due consideration?" Cole released a breath, a tightness in her shoulders. "A thorough review of archived material spanning decades, alongside recent documentation submitted by Miss Jenkins, is underway. The situation is indeed significant." Elena glanced back at Odessa. "Why today? Why now?" Odessa moved forward, her hands clasped. "Because I've buried too many people who waited for the world to show concern." Her mother would weep whenever she passed this building. She had worked at the post office across the street for 28 years, witnessing the name Jenkins vanish from the foundation plaque. "She passed away before I had the chance to show her that it mattered." Elena paused briefly, then spoke softly. "You're not pursuing this for financial gain?" Odessa smiled, a weary expression on her face. "Child, if I desired money, I could have sold these documents to a lawyer years ago. But what value is money compared to a legacy?" Hanley, still on the telephone across the room, disconnected the call. "Headquarters has authorized the commencement of internal investigation procedures, starting immediately." "And the founder's plaque?" Odessa inquired. Cole responded. "A replacement will be ordered, including both names, Hamilton and Jenkins." "That's acceptable," Odessa stated, her tone even. "However, I require the original to be sent to me. My grandfather's name shouldn't have been removed initially." Elena recorded a note. "Do you believe this account will motivate others?" Odessa offered a quiet chuckle. "I'm not concerned with inspiration. My focus is on whether it will alert people. Families are frequently victimized, not through violence, but through suppression, documentation suppression. The absence of a signature wouldn't draw scrutiny if the person who was missing resembled me." Externally, the narrative had already started circulating online. Several photos appeared. A brief video showed Odessa setting the ledger onto the table. Numerous comments, hundreds of shares followed. People were inquiring about the history of Hamilton First Bank. Speculation arose regarding how many other names might have been removed to provide reassurance. Inside, the bank's lobby remained calm. This wasn't due to embarrassment but acknowledgement. Cole stood, straightening her blazer. "A public statement, a formal apology, will be released within the next 24 hours. An offer for partnership will also be extended should Miss Jenkins accept." Odessa gazed out the window. The street lights began to illuminate the area below. Across the street, the post office was already closed. She contemplated what her mother would have thought had she lived to witness this. "I'm not here for a deal," she stated. "I am here to restore my grandfather's name to prominence. If you choose to resolve this without further legal action, I would consider that a positive first step. However, an apology would only hold significance if people recalled the reasons behind it, and that responsibility extends beyond the bank." By morning, news had broken. The story appeared on the front page of the Valley Record, circulating through social media and talk shows. Odessa Bell Jenkins, the woman who entered a bank with a sack and exited with history. News reports presented a simplified version of events. But what Odessa held was more than just history. It was a tapestry of memory woven with pain, patience, and documented evidence. The bank released a public statement shortly before noon. They described it as an error in historical representation and a profoundly regrettable exclusion from the bank's initial acknowledgement. Legal professionals had examined sufficient material to determine it wasn't a mere mistake, but a recurring issue. And it had taken one woman and one sack to expose the truth. In her simple home just outside Ceres, Odessa was seated in her preferred chair, holding a cracked coffee mug. The bag, now almost empty, rested folded on the coffee table. Beside it were the aged ledger and a new brass nameplate. Jenkins and Hamilton, founders, arrived by courier that morning, accompanied by a handwritten note from Diane Cole. The note stated, "We hope this small gesture marks a beginning, not an end. You reminded us what truth sounds like when it stands its ground." Mr. Ridgway, her neighbor, a retired mechanic who formerly waved but rarely engaged in conversation, arrived with banana bread and inquired if she would be willing to speak at the local college. Odessa laughed, saying, "Let me catch my breath first," to him. However, internally, something had shifted. It wasn't precisely pride, nor was it revenge. It was peace, because sometimes the most difficult aspect isn't revealing what was done to you, but waiting long enough for someone to notice that it occurred. Following 3 days, the bank held a private ceremony within their recently renamed Jenkins Hamilton Founders Hall. Odessa was present, wearing a navy blue suit and the familiar straw hat. She refrained from smiling for the photographers and avoided the customary politician's handshake. Instead, she stood before the new plaque, gently touched her grandfather's name, and quietly murmured, "You're home now." Elena Cruz was also in attendance, documenting the event with photographs and interviews for a subsequent article. Later, she inquired of Odessa what counsel she would offer to individuals carrying a past veiled by obscurity and quietude. "Do not seek authorization to share your narrative," Odessa stated. "Certain individuals may resist hearing it, but that does not diminish its validity." As the attendees commenced their departures, a youthful bank employee, the very same one who had chuckled on the initial day, approached her discreetly. Identifying himself as Daniel Ortiz, he offered, "I owe you an apology." "I didn't know. You didn't want to," Odessa responded kindly. "Indeed," he acknowledged, "you've altered my perspective on this place." "Thank you," she replied, offering him a measured glance. The wind rose and shook the doors as they shut behind her. The sun felt pleasant. Odessa's shoulders felt unburdened for the first time in a long time. She hadn't come to inflict harm. She came to reveal what ought never to have been hidden, not from resentment, but from affection. A deep affection for a man who instilled in her the understanding that truth requires patience. Affection for a family that warranted greater justice. Affection for each individual who has been forgotten simply because their memories were inconvenient. In the weeks that followed, other families began to come forward, inquiring about land deeds, property losses, and misfiled ownership records from decades past. Odessa did not intend to spearhead a movement, but her story had already ignited a spark. Because once people realized the silence wasn't accidental, they begin listening differently. And once they start listening, the world changes. So if you're holding a truth the world forgot, this story is for you. Do not let it decay in a drawer or vanish from your memory. Share it, safeguard it, and pass it on. Because occasionally, the softest voice in the room is the one that transforms everything. If Odessa's story resonated with you, share it. And subscribe to our channel for additional true stories that matter. It remains uncertain whose story will be shared next. He entered the bank, his appearance marked by a tattered coat and old shoes. People assumed he was simply another person experiencing homelessness. Then, he spoke calmly, stating, "I own the land this building sits on," and presented documentation to support his claim. The door chimes sounded as it always did upon entry, yet few people acknowledged it. They barely glanced up. A few fleeting looks were all it received. One woman subtly shifted her position to observe him before returning to her computer screen. Another took a sip of her coffee and rolled her eyes, murmuring something to the teller beside her. A man entering the space appeared out of sync with the surroundings, not threatening, simply different. The environment consisted of shiny glass, polished tile, and Bluetooth headsets visible behind the counters. This was Morris Coltrane Langston, age 62, with a thick gray beard. His coat was 2 sizes too large, and his jeans suggested a past no one wished to explore. He moved deliberately, not due to age, but with caution. Each step felt significant, as if he were assessing his place within the setting. He approached the counter where Brittany was working. She offered him a brief look. "Sir, a bank card or ID is required for withdrawals," she stated plainly. Morris offered a gentle smile, though it seemed weary. "I don't require a withdrawal. I need to discuss property," he said. Brittany's eyes widened slightly. She glanced at her colleague, who was visibly trying to contain laughter. "Property?" she asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "I believe I own the land this bank is built on." At that moment, the laughter erupted. The message originated from Cliff Yarrow, the assistant branch manager, who had approached, arms crossed. Cliff was a man who displayed his authority prominently. He made no attempt to conceal his amusement. "Sir, I believe you are at the incorrect building," Cliff stated. "This is not the county records office. You cannot simply enter and declare ownership of a bank." "I did not say I own the bank," Maurice responded, his voice quiet. "I said I own the land. There's a distinction." Now, all eyes were upon him. The security guard, identified as Lee, who typically appeared to be checking his phone near the door, stood up straighter and moved forward. Cliff questioned, "Do you have any paperwork to back that up?" Maurice slowly reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Lee reacted, conditioned by experience to anticipate a potential threat when a black man reached into a pocket. However, Morris's movements were unhurried and non-threatening. He carried the envelope deliberately, as if accustomed to it. He produced a thick, crumpled packet. The pages were yellowed with worn edges, having been folded and unfolded numerous times. At the top, it read, "Franklin Delroy, 1913 land deed." Below that were stamped legal seals and notary signatures. "I've held on to this since my father passed," I said. "And he kept it since his father passed," Maurice added. The deed belonged to a black-owned cooperative that obtained plots throughout this section of Knoxville during the Reconstruction era. I tapped the envelope gently. "This confirms my grandfather did not sell the land. It was leased. Ownership returned to us following a default, though this information was never shared." Brittany's smirk disappeared. Lee stopped scrolling. Cliff cleared his throat. "I believe it's time for you to leave, sir," he stated. "I think it's time someone examines the contents," Maurice said calmly. Then, an unexpected event occurred. A man from the office furthest to the left, John Delgado, the branch manager, emerged. He had been observing through the glass for the preceding few minutes. He requested the documents. Morris provided them immediately. John escorted them back to his office. A period of silence followed, lasting briefly. Subsequently, 5 minutes elapsed, then 10. Eventually, John appeared. His expression was altered. "Connect me with regional compliance on the line." Immediately, he stated. As phones began to ring and conversations grew concerned, Maurice remained still at his position by the counter. He was anticipating something, and they all understood, instinctively, that it wasn't a monetary request. Cliff walked back and forth behind the teller row, massaging the back of his neck, as if that would aid his comprehension of what he's heard. John Delgado continued on the phone, speaking in brief, strained sentences to someone at corporate. His office blinds were partially closed, but every few seconds, a glimpse of his face emerged from the gap. He wasn't smiling anymore. Brittany stood uncomfortably at her station, looking sideways at Maurice, who hadn't moved from his position. His hands were folded, and documents rested gently on the counter in front of him. "Do you want to sit down?" she finally asked, her voice softer. Maurice shook his head. "I've done enough sitting in my life." A man in a tailored suit and thick-rimmed glasses walked in briskly from the back entrance. His ID badge read Gerald Tisdale, Regional Property and Compliance. He went straight to Delgado's office without a word. Moments later, John opened the door again and waved for Maurice. Sir, would you mind stepping in for a moment? Maurice nodded once and retrieved his envelope. His boots made a slight scuffing sound against the tile as he entered the office. As the door closed behind him, the remaining staff members quieted. No one spoke. Even the security guard adjusted his position, uncertain whether to remain nearby or act as if nothing was occurring. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Mr. Langston, Gerald stated cautiously, I've reviewed the original deed and the tax history you provided. Could you please tell us where you've been keeping these documents? My father kept it in a box of his belongings, Maurice responded. He was a carpenter, building houses in Alcoa and Maryville before his knees failed. After he passed away, I kept the papers in a locker at a storage unit I used when I lacked permanent housing. Delgado appeared astonished. You're saying this land was never sold? That the trust was still active? Maurice retrieved a smaller, more recent envelope and gave it to Gerald. Inside was a typed letter from a small firm in Chattanooga, a probate specialist named Lena Fry, confirming the lapse in city filings and the reversion clause in the original agreement. The letter was dated 6 months ago. I only found it after she assisted me in reviewing some of my dad's old files. Thought it was junk at first, Gerald said, staring at the paper. His mouth opened a little, but he didn't speak. Legally, Maurice explained, this building stood on land that was part of my grandfather's estate. The lease agreement had been temporary. As the bank underwent mergers and changes in ownership over the years, the arrangement wasn't renewed. They simply built on the land, presuming no one would inquire. Delgado rubbed his temple. That represented decades of transactions, Maurice stated, and not a single one examined the records far enough back. Everyone seemed to think the past had resolved itself. Gerald rose quickly and gazed out the office window. We need to involve legal right away, he stated. Already done, John responded quietly. A voice drifted from outside the office, speaking too loudly. Why would a homeless man return for this now? What would he possibly do with a piece of land beneath a bank? Inside, Maurice noticed. He glanced towards the window, then resumed looking at Gerald. I didn't come for money, he said. I came seeking the truth, and perhaps a measure of respect. Gerald turned, finally meeting my eyes. There was a pause. You were not wrong, but while discussions focused on compliance and liability, something else was unfolding in the lobby. Whispers had escalated to murmurs, and one employee was already texting someone outside the bank. The story, as it turns out, began long before Maurice ever entered that bank. Prior to the advent of smartphones, before suburban expansion consumed agricultural land, before the concept of a man like Maurice could be envisioned, standing serenely with a document, contesting the very core of a multi-million-dollar organization. In 1913, Franklin Delroy, Morris's grandfather, was 23 years old and already recognized within Blount County for his skilled workmanship. His hands constructed churches, schoolhouses, and porches that remained standing a century later. Unbeknownst to many, Franklin was also a member of a discreet, close-knit group of black tradesmen, farmers, and ministers who combined their resources to purchase land. The purpose wasn't financial gain, but a matter of dignity. They identified as the East Blount Land Cooperative, and, throughout the years, they obtained small plots on the periphery of what was then essentially cow pasture. However, Franklin, ever the visionary, included a specific provision in his deed. Should the land ever undergo development, leasing, or a claim by another party without a sale, ownership would return to his descendants after a specified duration. In 1927, a lumber company made a payment to lease the land for a limited time. Subsequently, a warehouse was constructed, followed by a small credit union. By the 1970s, that credit union had transformed into a regional bank. And when it was acquired again in 2003, all of the original documents were misplaced, overlooked, or lost within the new ownership. The Delroy family was never notified. Franklin was gone by that point. Morris's father, Jasper Langston, attempted to preserve the family's history. However, circumstances grew difficult. Employment opportunities disappeared, and Jasper began drinking. The traditional stories evolved into mere bedtime stories, losing any sense of verifiable truth. Morris recalled sitting on the porch in his youth, listening to his dad describe the plot by the rail tracks that Granddaddy owned. Yet, it held little significance for him. The stories remained just that, stories, until he matured and understood how families like his were frequently excluded from their own history. In 2020, when COVID caused widespread closures and Morris was residing in a church basement in Sevierville, he finally sorted through the last of his father's possessions. Among them, he discovered the original deed carefully wrapped in wax paper, and within it, a small note written in his dad's handwriting. "If you find this, don't let him tell you we didn't leave anything behind." Morris took that note with great importance. He dedicated months to research at the public library. He made trips to the county clerk's office. He consulted with Lena Fry, the probate attorney who remained professional when he shared the story with her. She located the land records and carefully compared parcel numbers, and she verified his findings. The land, now valued at millions, had been leased, not sold. The original clause remained in effect. No legal purchase had ever occurred. Consequently, after years of homelessness, this situation seems quite unusual. Morris entered the building constructed upon his grandfather's land and stated something unexpected. "I believe this belongs to me." At the bank, John Delgado now had the documents spread across his desk. They contained a century's worth of signatures, carbon copies, and ink stamps from courthouses that no longer existed. Gerald, the regional compliance officer, examined one page as if it had committed a personal offense. According to this clause, he stated, "The property returns to the original family if the lease expires without renewal or sale." John confirmed this had occurred twice, and the family was not notified. "That's correct." A significant silence followed. Then Gerald quietly expressed concern, saying, "We're in trouble." Maurice remained seated opposite them, silent. He showed no sign of a smile. However, a sense of calm was evident on his face. It was as if a man had, at long last, joined together all the pieces of a puzzle and possessed the perseverance to complete it. As events aligned within that office, a woman on her lunch break began live streaming the growing disturbance outside the bank. The unfolding situation quickly transcended their internal narrative. The lobby's ambience underwent a change. Initial silent assessment evolved into quiet wonder. The atmosphere then became something different altogether, a palpable sense of nervous anticipation. A teller had moved away from her workspace and was positioned by the coffee machine, appearing to stir sugar while observing the office door as if expecting someone to enter. The security guard had repositioned himself, now standing nearer to Morris's chair, seemingly not for protection, but perhaps to observe. Beyond the glass partitions, John Delgado's office was full. Gerald Tisdale was participating in a video conference with a group of legal representatives from corporate, their faces difficult to interpret. A senior counsel, Mark Levin, repeatedly posed the same inquiry. How did this oversight occur? No one could provide a satisfactory explanation. The numerous transfers of ownership involving various parent companies and banks had obscured the documentation until Morris brought it back to their attention. "There's a public title gap," Gerald stated. "No signed release, no recorded sale." The reversion clause was never satisfied. Mark Levin moved closer to the screen. "Does this man, Langston, possess the original documents?" John stated that he has more than just documents. He has lineage, and we verified the parcel data. It's the same land. The only alterations were the asphalt and steel constructed upon it. Mark pinched his nose. "Okay, here's what we need. Secure a release from this man. Offer a small settlement. Remove him from the building before the press arrives." Maurice, seated quietly nearby, understood their thinking without needing to hear the discussion. He understood the atmosphere. After decades of observing how people assess your value, John ended the call and turned to him. "Mr. Langston, would you be willing to settle this today? We could quietly arrange compensation, something equitable." Morris folded his arms. "What's fair to you?" John paused. "That would require negotiation. But if we act quickly, we could avoid unwanted publicity." Maurice chuckled softly. Unwanted by whom? John momentarily looked surprised. A knock sounded at the glass door. A woman, identifiable by the local news logo on her lanyard, smiled and raised her phone. Hello. We've received information that someone entered with a land deed asserting ownership of the bank property. May we speak with Mr. Langston? John's face visibly drained. Who informed you? A voice from the lobby murmured. The live streams have exceeded 12,000 viewers. Morris rose to his feet deliberately. There's nothing to be concerned about. I'm not intending to cause a disturbance. Gerald approached. Mr. Langston, please understand that this situation requires careful handling. It would benefit everyone involved if we could maintain discretion. I attempted a subtle approach, Maurice stated. I'm accustomed to quiet. It defined much of my existence. It yielded no progress. A pause settled over the group. Gerald seemed poised to object, but a palpable truth lingered, inescapable. Returning to the lobby, Brittany spoke softly to Maurice. The amusement had vanished from her face. Do you truly possess this? She inquired. I have always possessed it, he replied. The recollection seemed to simply vanish. She lowered her gaze, a hint of embarrassment visible. I'm sorry. Morris's expression eased a little. It's not your fault. You were instructed on how to behave when someone like me enters. The bank's doors opened once more, and 2 additional reporters entered. A man carried a boom microphone over his shoulder. Another began recording with his phone. Cliff attempted to block their entry. This is private property. A reporter responded, observing Maurice. Not for long. As inquiries began from the media, Maurice did not seek attention. He instead glanced back at the familiar envelope he held, the one that held his family's history across generations, and understood it was time for the world to know it. Maurice needed no microphone. He needed no formal announcement. He simply needed to remain where he was. That was sufficient. A reporter, a woman in her 40s named Kimber Rowland from WBR, approached. Mr. Langston, could you verify that you assert ownership of the land the bank occupies? Maurice met her gaze, unwavering. I'm not asserting anything, he stated. I'm presenting facts, and the document in my hand demonstrates what none of you ever took the time to investigate. Kimber nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the significance in his tone. What outcome are you pursuing with this? Maurice didn't respond immediately. He turned to address the increasingly large gathering. There were customers, employees, and security present, with some people watching from the sidewalk. What I'm hoping for, he said finally, is that the next time someone walks in looking like I do, maybe people won't react with amusement first. The silence that followed was palpable. The young man who had been laughing earlier near the coffee machine suddenly looked down at his shoes. Brittany tightened her grip on her ID badge and avoided his gaze. Cliff shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. Look, sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. You need to comprehend. We simply weren't prepared. There was laughter. Maurice intervened. You all responded that way. The moment I entered the room, you observed my coat, my shoes, the discoloration on my hands, and you determined I was insignificant. No one spoke. Have you ever considered how many people you're likely to dismiss each day? Moving around here as if you possess all the knowledge. As if you've already assessed someone's narrative merely by viewing their exterior. John Delgado moved ahead, attempting to redirect the situation. Mr. Langston, we are ready to offer a formal apology and begin settlement negotiations. Maurice gave him a drawn-out, weary look. Do you still believe this concerns finances? A teenager with a camera phone murmured to his friend, out of view of the reporters, Dude, this person is really committed. Observe the documents. Kimber, perceiving something more significant, inquired, Where have you been until now? What prompted you to come forward at this time? Maurice sighed, not in annoyance, simply in contemplation. Following my dad's passing, I lost interest in matters of this nature. I was preoccupied with basic survival, taking on sporadic jobs like roofing, welding, and janitorial work whenever available. Maintaining stable housing proved difficult when people avoided direct interaction. I experienced periods of both prosperity and hardship, followed by even more challenging times. He paused. There were nights I slept under bridges and mornings I cleaned the same floors people used to ignore me. However, I never discarded that envelope. The memory of every shelter I stayed in, every town I passed through, remained with me. He held it up gently. It's all I had left from a man who believed we were worth more than people thought. And one day, I simply grew weary of silence. A woman from the crowd spoke softly. You kept the deed all these years? Maurice nodded. 50 years it stayed in our family. Passed from one calloused hand to another, Kimber asked. And what now? He surveyed the bank lobby, his gaze lingering on each employee who had assessed him that morning. What now? He repeated. Now you recall my name. From a corner location, Gerald spoke to John. This is going to be a public relations disaster. However, the individuals within the bank weren't observing Gerald. They were observing Maurice. Truly observing. Some for the first time, as if a barrier had been removed. Not just from his narrative, but from theirs as well. You believe I was unseen? Maurice stated softly. I remained present. You simply didn't observe carefully enough. However, the outside world had already begun to notice. They perceived a man who brought more than just a deed to that building. He carried evidence that dignity isn't derived from affluence. It arises from steadfastly maintaining one's identity. By the following morning, the narrative had spread beyond state lines. Every local news station in Tennessee aired a rendition of it. Some reported inaccuracies. A report suggested Maurice had assumed control of the bank, a claim that proved false. Nevertheless, the message spread. Residents of Blount County, particularly older individuals, began searching through attics and storage boxes, questioning what they might have overlooked. College students shared excerpts online with accompanying text, such as this exemplifies generational theft. To them, Maurice wasn't a news item. He represented an alert and a sign. At the bank, the situation quickly worsened. Legal representatives from the corporation arrived from elsewhere. Security personnel were now joined by local police officers patrolling the parking lot, employed for crowd management. Demonstrators had assembled along the sidewalk, displaying cardboard signs. Their messages included phrases like respect land rights. Not just a deed, a legacy. He was right all along. Maurice hadn't organized the gathering, nor had he requested anyone to attend, yet they came. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald Tisdale was pacing once more, his face flushed as he managed calls from corporate and press liaisons. John Delgado was in his office, with the blinds completely shut, feeling the burden of everything. Maurice was in the break room, drinking coffee from paper cup. Never thought I'd be allowed in here, he remarked, mostly to himself. Kimber Rowland had returned, and her camera crew was filming quietly from the parking lot. She wasn't trying to create problems. She was simply waiting for the story to unfold. That afternoon, a legal representative, Clay Addison, entered the bank. He possessed a clean-shaven appearance, a southern drawl, and wore a silk tie that appeared more valuable than Morris's entire wardrobe. He did not offer a smile. Mr. Langston, Clay began, settling across from him, let me start by saying our firm recognizes the validity of your documentation. We are here to discuss terms. Maurice listened intently, remaining still. You placed our client in a complex situation. We acknowledge the oversight and are ready to present a substantial financial offer for the permanent transfer of ownership. A paper was slid across the table by Clay. Maurice looked at it, then raised his gaze. You believe this is the core issue? He inquired, his voice level. It's a considerable sum, Clay stated. It's a price, Maurice replied, and it doesn't come close to covering what you're attempting to resolve. Clay released a sharp breath. What would be acceptable to you? Maurice leaned forward, composed but resolute. I want a plaque with my grandfather's name displayed out front. I also want the official record corrected with the city, and I want a foundation established in his name, one that provides housing for families who have experienced similar circumstances. Clay blinked. Are you serious? I'm absolutely serious. There's a significant pause. Then Clay said, I will present this to the board. You please do that. Information about the negotiation became public the same day. And when it did, an unforeseen development occurred. People began making donations. People donated online, in person, and by check. One woman from Jackson traveled 2 hours to personally hand Maurice a $20 bill and express her gratitude for him ensuring they weren't forgotten. The bank subsequently released a brief statement later that week, stating, "We recognize the validity of Mr. Maurice Langston's claim and are working in good faith to resolve this matter respectfully. We have deep appreciation for the legacy of Franklin Delroy and the community he helped build." While corporate and sanitized, this statement was unexpected. Regarding Maurice, there was no celebration. No press conference was held. He simply exited the bank one afternoon, carrying the same envelope he had entered with. However, this time he wasn't alone. 3 generations of Delroys stood with him in spirit, and hundreds more supported them. While legal teams assessed expenses and public relations teams prepared announcements, the most important aspect had already transpired. Someone like Maurice had finally been acknowledged, and the narrative was no longer controlled by the bank. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten. The sun shone that morning. Maurice Langston stood in front of the bank again. Now, he wasn't standing on disputed land. He was standing on his grandfather's land, officially recognized by the city of Knoxville as part of the Franklin Delroy Legacy Trust. It wasn't just a name on paper anymore. A new plaque had been installed outside the bank's main entrance, embedded in a small brick pedestal near the sidewalk. Bronze letters, clear and lasting. Dedicated to Franklin Delroy, 1890 to 1954, builder, father, landowner. His legacy endures. Maurice touched it softly. The plaque felt cool beneath his fingertips. He remained silent. Words weren't necessary. A small group had assembled for the unveiling. Community leaders, students from the local university, reporters, and some of the same bank staff who previously ridiculed him were present. Brittany stood at the rear, her hands clasped, attempting to make eye contact with Maurice whenever he turned. This time he succeeded. The foundation he had proposed was already being established. A partnership with a local nonprofit was formed within weeks of the settlement. The Delroy Housing Fund would provide grants to families at risk of homelessness, particularly those who have been disadvantaged by legal complexities and overlooked actions. "I didn't desire revenge," Maurice told Kimber Rowland in his final interview. "I simply wanted the truth to endure beyond the falsehood." It had taken years to reach this point. For years, he had experienced being overlooked, marginalized, and disregarded. However, the instant he entered through those glass doors, holding a creased envelope and a legacy of suffering, things began to shift. And currently, he was simply a man identified by a name. He had acquired a modest, well-kept house not distant from the outskirts of Alcoa, close to the same areas where his father had previously constructed porches and fences. It wasn't elaborate, merely a neat area, a functional sink, a bed to relax in. Occasionally, he would sit on a plastic chair outside, sipping coffee and greeting children cycling up the slope. On other occasions, he collaborated with local high schools, discussing land ownership, family histories, and the consequences of oblivion with students. Preserve your documents, he advised them. Retain your names. Ensure no one erases your people from the narrative. People now referred to him as Mr. Langston. At times, even Sir, but the designation he valued most was the one his grandfather had attained. Builder. It wasn't about buildings, but about something larger. Legacy. He never anticipated forgiveness from the bank. However, it wasn't necessary. What he required, he received: an acknowledgement, a correction, and the opportunity for those who followed to declare, "I belong here too." The bank continued its operations, but the employees carried themselves differently. They engaged with people they had previously overlooked. They posed questions rather than making assumptions. The transformation wasn't flawless, but it represented a meaningful shift. One afternoon, several months following the resolution of events, Brittany approached him outside the community center. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice betraying nervousness. "Yes," he replied. I've been taking night classes. Real estate law." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he inquired. "After everything that happened, I realized how much I didn't know. About ownership, history, how things get passed down or lost." Morris smiled, slow and genuine. "Good for you." She paused. "I'm sorry for how I treated you that first day." He nodded. An apology wasn't necessary. It was owed to the individual who would next enter. She considered this thoughtfully, responding, "Yes, I will." He retrieved a copy of the original deed, a replica, to be exact, from his coat and gave it to her. "Keep this. Use it in class. Teach someone something." She accepted it with care, as if it were fragile. As she departed, Morris looked towards the street and observed a group of teenagers assembling at the bus stop across the road. One of them gestured towards the plaque. The others drew closer to listen. He remained silent, allowing them to continue. He simply observed, a quiet sense of pride welling up within him as his grandfather's name emerged in the discussion once more. Perhaps that's how genuine transformation truly begins. Not through rage, nor solely through the pursuit of justice, but through remembrance and the bravery to keep it alive. Should you experience a feeling while hearing Morris's narrative, do not hold it back. Spread it. Discuss it. And if there's a family name you haven't mentioned in some time, vocalize it. The impact of legacies endures only when we actively preserve them. Subscribe for more stories that illuminate the true meaning of dignity. For years, she evaded consequences for her inappropriate behavior until she struck a formally attired black man in court, unaware that he was the judge. The immediate aftermath shattered everything she had established. It unfolded rapidly, unexpectedly. Neither the bailiff, the court reporter, nor even the defendant seated anxiously in the front row anticipated it. Officer Tiffany Rourke had just entered courtroom 2B within the Franklin County Courthouse in Missouri. Her uniform was impeccable, her jaw set, as was her habit. She had established a reputation over the last 10 years, known for being authoritative, direct, and someone to avoid provoking. That morning, she was scheduled to testify in a minor drug possession case. However, she did not reach the witness stand. She noticed a sharply dressed black man standing close to the witness box, speaking softly with one of the attorneys. Without hesitation, she swiftly crossed the courtroom floor and slapped him across the face. The impact resonated through the room. A gasp followed, shared and instantaneous. You could hear the sound of papers falling, a pen rolling onto the floor. For a moment, everything seemed to still. Everyone remained motionless. The man showed no reaction. He didn't flinch, yell, lunge, or raise a hand. He calmly adjusted his tie, brushed his cheek with the back of his hand, and looked her directly in the eye. "I'm Judge Antoine Kelly," he stated, his voice even and deliberate, "and I'm presiding over this courtroom today." That silence? It wasn't just shock anymore. It was palpable, a heavy presence. Every pair of eyes focused on Tiffany, who now appeared as if she'd swallowed a bucket of nails. She blinked once, twice, her mouth barely moving as if struggling to speak. The bailiff, hesitant about the situation, moved restlessly near the door. The young public defender close by immediately reached for her phone, documenting the scene discreetly. Others followed suit. Within seconds, at least 4 phones were recording the event. Tiffany attempted to speak. "I thought he wasn't supposed to be," but the moment had passed. Judge Kelly addressed the silent courtroom and announced, "We're taking a 10-minute recess." Then, he entered his chambers, silent, his expression unreadable. The room remained still. No one knew whether to stand, sit, or depart. Tiffany remained motionless. Her hand, the one she'd used, trembled subtly at her side. The prosecutor approached her and whispered, "You just assaulted a judge." Tiffany gazed at him, visibly pale and blinking quickly, as if the foundation had been removed from beneath her. The news spread rapidly. News reporters, awaiting a separate gang indictment case, quickly entered the hallway. Interns, having left the room visibly shaken, alerted 2 local news outlets. By noon, the video appeared on social media. It was unedited, uncontextualized footage depicting a white police officer in uniform striking a black judge in the courtroom. The accompanying caption on many reposts read, "Cop slaps a judge, unaware he is a judge." Initially, several commenters questioned its authenticity, suggesting it might be staged. The video lacked polish. it mirrored the unpredictable nature of everyday existence. There was no background music, no dramatic camera work, only palpable tension and genuine emotions. Subsequently, responses emerged from lawyers, activists, and former defendants, each possessing unique perspectives. Some immediately identified Tiffany, while others knew her through her reputation. Judge Kelly, however, remained silent. He released no public statement, avoided television appearances, and refrained from pursuing legal action. He remained seated behind his desk, reviewing the day's schedule as if nothing had occurred. However, everyone else recognized a significant change, the kind of change that leaves a lasting impact. Yet, before anyone could fully understand the implications, questions began to surface. What was the truth about Officer Tiffany Rourke? Prior to the incident, most individuals outside of Franklin County were unfamiliar with the name Tiffany Rourke. Within the force, however, she wasn't merely recognized, she was feared. Tiffany's ascent was rapid. Some believe it was too rapid. After graduating from the academy in her early 20s, she progressed to patrol, then narcotics, and subsequently to a specialized task force concentrating on high-risk neighborhoods. She received medals, appeared in department newsletters, and presented at 2 police conferences. However, beyond the publicized events and formal greetings, there existed another facet of Tiffany, the one largely unknown to the public. The initial signs were subtle. A young black driver, ticketed for a broken taillight, asserted he had not violated any laws. When he attempted to explain his situation, Tiffany increased the fine, citing noncompliance. He subsequently submitted a formal complaint, which was not addressed. A Latina mother reported that Tiffany conducted a vehicle search without justification outside a grocery store. When her 10-year-old daughter inquired about the reason, Tiffany responded, "You people should know better." The mother became distressed and filed a report, which was closed within a week. Subsequently, an event occurred that nearly reached the media. A video surfaced showing Tiffany verbally abusing 2 black teenagers seated outside a convenience store. She accused them of loitering. One of the teenagers recorded her outburst. However, the clip disappeared after the boys were arrested for resisting. There were also rumors circulating within the department's locker rooms and among court clerks. Tiffany reportedly used derogatory language when she believed she wasn't being observed. She allegedly threatened junior officers who did not support her in their official reports. Whenever her name surfaced in a formal grievance, the Internal Affairs Division discreetly marked the file as not sustained. She benefited from influential connections, including Chief Brannon, who described her as a capable officer navigating difficult circumstances. He believed the public lacked comprehension regarding the demands of policing in those communities. Fellow officers, such as Officer Sam Delaney, recognized the pattern early on. He once attempted to voice his concerns after witnessing Tiffany forcefully push a suspect's head against a cruiser window. She informed me that if I submitted any documents, my locker would be emptied by Monday. Consequently, he withdrew. They all did, not because they shared her perspective, but because Tiffany embodied the established order. She wasn't a deviation from it, nor an unusual case. She was the system. She represented the convergence of power and prejudice disguised by authority. And it wasn't simply her behavior, it was the confidence stemming from her perceived immunity. Around 6 months prior to the courtroom incident, a newly appointed officer, Jordan McLean, submitted a formal complaint following 2 weeks of riding alongside her. During that time, she halted 6 vehicles in a single day. All the drivers were black, and they were all within the same 3-block area. He documented in the internal log that none of the stops were warranted. McLean was then reassigned to desk duty 2 weeks later. Tiffany received a commendation. The underlying issue wasn't solely Tiffany's actions. It was the fact that others allowed her behavior to continue. Her advancement within the department wasn't in spite of her conduct, it stemmed from it. However, vulnerabilities had been appearing for some time prior to the incident involving Judge Kelly. Previously dismissed grievances began to reappear discreetly. The Internal Affairs Division had undergone a change in leadership. and recently elected city council members showed less willingness to ignore problematic issues. Yet, Tiffany remained unchanged. In fact, her actions intensified. At a precinct barbecue, she dismissed the evolving situation as political maneuvering, declaring to her colleagues, "They can't touch me. I possess more damaging information about a significant portion of this department than they have about me." She was unaware of this fact. However, that wasn't a display of influence. It was a countdown, and it had already begun. But when she delivered that false accusation in court, targeting the incorrect individual in the most detrimental location, that countdown reached zero. Consequently, the entire system she had depended on started to falter. When Judge Antoine Kelly returned to his chambers, he didn't forcefully close the door. He didn't discard any objects. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took a seat. He inhaled, moved closer, and grasped the pile of case files on his desk as if it were a routine Tuesday. However, it was anything but. This was unprecedented for the numerous individuals present in that courtroom. It was unusual for the lawyers who had witnessed considerable stress. But it was especially shocking for everyone involved. Nobody had ever seen a uniformed officer strike a sitting judge. Kelly had served as a judge for 12 years, primarily in Franklin County. He preferred a modest demeanor. He avoided publicity. He favored simple ties. He kept photos of his wife and 3 sons on his bookshelf, alongside a miniature gavel his youngest made in woodshop. Those who knew him understood one thing. His quiet presence carried weight. He had grown up in St. Peters, Missouri. He was the first in his family to go to college, then law school. He worked in public defense for 7 years before switching sides. He'd seen every kind of case, the petty, the tragic, the senseless. He treated them all with the same steady focus. The scene in that courtroom was jarring. That slap? It was a familiar feeling for him. Disrespect had been a constant companion throughout his career. However, this was unlike anything he's experienced, not a subtle insult, but a physical act performed publicly and undeniably. Remarkably, he didn't react with anger or boasting. Kelly avoided theatrics. He prioritized accountability. In the hallway, his clerk, Monique Barnes, remained motionless, still clutching the folder she was intending to present prior to the incident. She entered his office cautiously. "Are you all right?" she inquired. He looked up, appearing composed. "I'm fine." She took a seat, her gaze carefully observing his face for any indication of anger. "I don't know what she thought she was doing," Monique stated. "We can file something. Press charges. The footage is already widespread." He nodded. "We could, but I want to observe how they manage it." She inclined her head. "You mean the department?" he asked, folding his hands. "The entire system." He continued. "Let's see if it's still averse to accountability." Monique noticed his approach. She understood his method. He wouldn't be aggressive. He would wait and allow them to reveal their intentions. By lunchtime, Judge Kelly's name was widely discussed online. People recalled him from a graduation speech delivered at a local high school 2 years prior. Video segments reappeared. Notable statements were shared. The law isn't a weapon. It's a tool, and it belongs to everyone, not just the loudest voices. However, he remained silent. He did not post on social media or issue a formal declaration. Responding to inquiries from reporters at the close of the day regarding potential charges, he offered this statement. "I anticipate the same level of professionalism and accountability that I have demonstrated to others over the past 12 years. I am confident that the system will address this appropriately." The situation presented a challenge, concealed by a demeanor of composure, and this was perceived by those around him. Concurrently, within the department, the atmosphere was becoming strained. The chief's assistant had left 3 messages on Tiffany's voicemail. A discreet inquiry was sent to HR by legal counsel representing the county. Simultaneously, at least 2 junior officers had reported being ill, seemingly to avoid involvement in the escalating situation. However, Kelly refrained from pressing the matter, as it was unnecessary. The recorded footage conveyed a more compelling narrative. Later that evening, at their residence, his wife, Nadine, sat beside him on the couch, holding his hand. "You should have permitted them to remove her in handcuffs," She stated softly. I desire to do so. He confessed, but I did not. She sighed, recognizing it wouldn't resolve the situation. You think this time will be different? He glanced at their joined hands. I believe this time she chose the wrong man in the wrong place at the precise right moment. But if Tiffany thought the silence indicated defeat, she was about to discover just how resounding dignity could become when the nation was finally observing. By the following morning, Tiffany Rourke was placed on administrative leave. The official email from the department provided little detail. An investigation is underway concerning an incident involving court personnel. However, the details did not require a formal announcement. They were widely disseminated. The event rapidly spread online, with news broadcasts repeatedly showing it. Podcasts offered detailed analyses, and online forums were filled with accounts from individuals claiming prior negative experiences with her. A video surfaced from 4 years prior, depicting Tiffany arguing with a teenage boy during a traffic stop. The footage, grainy and captured by dashcam, showed her words slurred slightly and her tone menacing. The boy had been released without charges. However, the recording remained unseen until now. This time, people weren't just speaking, they were paying attention. And her badge offered no protection. Within the department, disarray reigned. Officers murmured in hallways. Her closest allies, those who previously joked with her at Friday briefings, now abruptly had other commitments when she approached. A memo from Internal Affairs began circulating. We are seeking interviews with individuals who work directly under or alongside Officer Rourke. More than a dozen officers responded within 24 hours. Some did not provide their names. One of these officers, Detective Naomi Brennan, stated that she had waited almost 6 years to share her information. According to Naomi, she had previously threatened to reassign me to the county jail rotation if I questioned her reports again. A patrol officer, previously a cadet, recounted an instance where Tiffany placed a flashlight beneath a suspect's seat to create a pretext for a search. She referred to this as insurance, claiming no one would review her recorded footage. The situation had escalated beyond the initial incident. What began as a single event became a catalyst. Subsequently, a series of previously concealed issues were exposed. The Internal Affairs Department initiated a review of her prior reports, conducting comparisons. Analysis revealed certain trends, an imbalance in stops, and uncertain reasons given for those stops. The complaints persisted. Meanwhile, Tiffany attempted to shape the story. She contacted a local conservative talk show host, providing a hesitant phone interview, alleging the judge had appeared threatening and made a sudden action. The interview failed to gain traction. Even her consistent supporters hesitated. The sound of public relations defenses weakening became palpable when the host abruptly ended the segment, stating they would await further information before drawing conclusions. Subsequently, an email arrived from her union lawyer. A conflict of interest prevents me from continuing to represent you in this situation. Essentially, you're facing significant public scrutiny. Her inbox was flooded with messages. Journalists contacted her. Friends ceased responding. Even her daughter, 19-year-old Avery, a college freshman, sent a brief text. Why would you do that, Mom? Tiffany was seated in her kitchen. The once esteemed medals from her service were positioned above the refrigerator. They appeared altered now, more burdensome, as though they no longer belonged to her. She continued to feel she hadn't erred significantly. Not truly. He appeared like a perpetrator. She murmured, by herself at her kitchen table. He shouldn't have been present there, attired as he was, speaking as if he controlled the situation. Yet, she was aware. This wasn't about what Judge Kelly wore or his location. It was about her instinct, the one she never scrutinized, the one that had secured her advancements, esteem, and apprehension, but never responsibility. And now, that instinct had transformed into a destructive force. 2 days following the incident, the Franklin County Police Department conducted a press conference. Marking the first time in 15 years, the chief was accompanied by legal counsel. We do not endorse Officer Rourke's behavior in the courtroom. An internal investigation is underway. We are treating this matter with utmost seriousness. He offered no praise, such as describing her as a good cop or noting distinguished service. He provided no words of support, just facts, objective and detached. Tiffany observed the press conference on her living room television, mirroring the actions of everyone else. However, if she believed the lack of communication from her colleagues was the most challenging aspect, she was soon to discover the consequences of the foundation she relied upon gradually disintegrating, piece by piece. Tiffany previously moved through the department with an air of ownership. That was no longer the case. Those few who still met her gaze did so fleetingly and anxiously, as if they wished to avoid association with her. The precinct felt different now. Her firm authority had vanished, leaving an unsettling emptiness. It was as if a flawed painting had been removed, yet the fastener remained embedded in the wall. The period of administrative leave stretched on, devoid of salary, identification, and explanation, only a prolonged wait. At her residence, her sphere of influence diminished rapidly. Her daughter, Avery, had ceased responding to messages, not since the night of the incident. They had not shared a particularly close bond. Tiffany had guided her upbringing with structure rather than affection. Now, the silence felt different. She attempted to call again. "This is your mom. Please, just talk to me." The line disconnected after the initial ring. Tiffany looked at her phone for a significant time before setting it face down. She had believed for so long that she was in charge, that people's fear indicated respect, that those internal criticisms were merely background noise from individuals who didn't comprehend the demands of the position. Now, she sat at her kitchen table, the blinds partially drawn to obscure the camera van parked across the street. Her time was abundant, and the silence was profound. She had not yet been charged. However, the department was no longer offering her protection. The union had ceased communication. The lawyers had stopped responding. Simultaneously, further allegations surfaced. A civil rights watchdog group submitted a petition demanding an independent review of each case she had handled during the previous 5 years. Individuals began to come forward, one after another. Individuals previously considered suspects. Former officers, even a retired judge who remembered Tiffany yelling at a defendant during a trial. He had dismissed it then as stress. She checked online to read the comments, simply out of curiosity. Rourke exemplifies the need for reform. This woman believed she was above the law. She antagonized the wrong judge. Fortunately, and then the most damaging remarks. From people who asserted they were her friends. I consistently felt uneasy about her. Her behavior was consistently overly assertive. I recall an instance where she laughed following a child's tears in an interrogation room. That moment remains vivid. It wasn't disloyalty, it felt like obliteration, as if she had no connection to them whatsoever. Her voicemail was overflowing with messages. Reporters, civil attorneys, and even a woman from a documentary company inquiring whether Tiffany would consider sharing her perspective. She did not respond to the call. The garage offered her a semblance of security. She would sit in the car, engine off, doors locked. She would spend hours inside, mechanically performing tasks, revisiting past cases in her thoughts, repeatedly telling herself that none of this would have occurred if that judge had recused himself, if he hadn't been attempting to create a disruption. However, regardless of how many ways she analyzed the situation, she couldn't alter the fact that she had slapped a man in open court, a man who presented no danger, who was not a suspect, who held the position of a sitting judge, and the entire country witnessed it. During one afternoon, her neighbor, Mrs. Beasley, who previously waved at her during morning jogs, passed by with her dog and did not even acknowledge Tiffany. That small instance affected her more than anticipated. The subtle dismissal, the courteous rejection, it felt more impactful than the news reports. Because news reports disappear, but being overlooked, that remains. She magnified her image. Sunglasses, a smirk, her hand rested on her hip. At the time, she believed she projected power. Now, she perceived only arrogance. However, just as she felt her decline had reached its lowest point, a letter arrived. It requested her presence at a public hearing, an event that would expose everything and compel her to confront the one man who never increased his volume, but had already undermined her legacy. A public hearing was planned for a Thursday morning at 9:30 a.m. inside the Franklin County Municipal Assembly Hall. The venue itself indicated that this would not be a routine, closed-door assessment. It was intended to be observed. When Tiffany arrived, dressed in a simple black suit, without any identification or weapons, the room was already mostly filled. Journalists occupied the rear wall, their audio equipment attached to their belts. The folding chairs creaked as residents, activists, and legal observers filled them. Behind a line of junior prosecutors, in the second row, sat Judge Antoine Kelly. He wore a dark gray suit instead of a robe, with a legal pad resting on his knee. His eyes were calm, and he appeared to be someone who had come to work, present to observe, not to punish. Tiffany's lawyer, recently appointed and a young public defender who had accepted her case with some hesitation, stood next to her, offering instructions she barely registered. Facing them, the Civilian Review Board was arranged in a semicircle of plastic nameplates and serious faces. Present were a retired detective, a former public defender, a local pastor, a community organizer, and a judge from another county. Although it wasn't a courtroom, it felt much like one. Chairwoman Ms. Loretta Vaughn initiated the session precisely. Her voice possessed a sharp clarity that commanded attention. This hearing is not a trial. It is a public review of Officer Tiffany Rourke's conduct, encompassing both recent events and her past record, and assessing its relevance to her continued ability to serve in law enforcement. Tiffany Rourke visibly reacted to the phrase, "continue serving," as if suggesting that possibility remained. It felt, to her, as though this wasn't the conclusion of her career. The proceedings commenced with the courtroom video, displayed on a modest monitor that inadequately conveyed the gravity of the situation, yet allowed for no dispute. The audio reverberated softly within the hall. The sound of the strike, the ensuing quiet, Judge Kelly's composed voice. Following this, testimony was presented. Officer Naomi Brennan delivered her written account concerning the threat Tiffany issued 6 years ago. Her tone remained even but detached. Subsequently, 2 individuals previously arrested testified, both noting that Tiffany's name appeared in their official records, even though they were not present during the incidents. She reportedly authorized their arrests without providing any clarification. A succession of witnesses offered similar accounts, while Tiffany remained still, her gaze fixed forward, exhibiting no visible response. Towards the conclusion of the proceedings, the chairwoman requested Judge Kelly to approach the microphone. He arrived without legal documents or written notes, simply standing with his jacket fastened and then speaking. I will not take this board's time reiterating what everyone witnessed. That information is already part of the public record. He began. What I want to focus on is what follows accountability, because that's where the essential work commences. He paused. A few pens scratched against paper. I have served this county for over a decade. I have observed people commit reckless actions out of fear. I have seen people lash out because they felt insignificant. But what transpired that day in my courtroom was neither fear nor a mistake. It was an instinctive reaction developed over years of unrestricted authority. He shifted subtly, just enough to connect with Tiffany's gaze. I'm not present to destroy anyone's life. I'm here to bring this community to remember what justice should embody, and what it must not resemble evermore. Then he took his seat. There was no applause, no acknowledgments, only silence. Tiffany's legal representative offered some concluding remarks, largely formal, primarily requesting compassion. It was inconsequential. The board observed a short break prior to releasing their recommendation. Officer Tiffany Rourke was scheduled for permanent removal from duty. All benefits were to be revoked, and her conduct would be referred to the state attorney for further review. She remained still, appearing detached, as the room cleared. The way people regarded her had changed, not with fear or even animosity, but with a lack of interest. That absence of concern felt particularly painful. Judge Kelly passed her as he left. He did not pause. He did not glance back. Because some individuals do not require revenge, the truth was sufficient. Long after the cameras stopped flashing, the question lingered. What lesson would the community retain from the quiet that ultimately compelled the system to respond? Weeks elapsed. The headlines diminished. Other controversies gained prominence. Yet, in Franklin County, a change occurred. Genuinely this time. Not merely in hushed conversations, not in secret meetings, but in the way people viewed the system, in the way they viewed one another. The courtroom where it happened remained active. Cases proceeded as they always did. However, a palpable shift occurred when Judge Antoine Kelly entered the room. Everyone rose with a distinct air of reverence, not solely due to his position, but because of how he conducted himself. He never sought recognition or accolades. He consistently performed his duties. On one afternoon, following a juvenile hearing, a young public defender approached him in the hallway. "Can I ask you something, Judge?" She inquired, looking around. She then asked, "That day, how did you stay calm?" He paused for a moment. I preferred not to give her what she anticipated. Then he smiled gently. He nodded once, and he walked on. That response lingered with her, and it resonated through the courthouse in other ways. Officers began participating in revised bias training that held genuine significance. A community board was granted substantive authority, more than just a nameplate and a folding table. Certain old case files were examined. Not every single one, but a selection, sufficient to signal that the doors were beginning to open. Regarding Tiffany Rourke, she reseated. She divested her home discreetly and relocated to a new area spanning 3 counties. There were no interviews granted, nor any public announcements made. She secured employment in private security for a shipping company. Her name ceased to be prominently featured in news reports, appearing only occasionally as a minor reference in opinion pieces. There was no return to public life, no narrative of recovery. Her decline wasn't sudden, it was gradual. Yet, what she forfeited was the sole thing of consequence to her: authority. And in its place, a silence settled that she couldn't alter. Simultaneously, more individuals stepped forward. Individuals harmed by fellow officers. Significant events, all fueled by what they witnessed in the courtroom. They sought not retribution, but recognition. That was the impact. The incident when Tiffany struck Judge Kelly was pivotal. It represented the culmination of a previously concealed history, a truth that resonated with the public. In a community like Franklin County, where progress typically unfolded gradually and discreetly, such visibility had a profound effect, extending far beyond the police department. The event disrupted the routines of an entire community. During a town hall meeting held 2 months afterward, a woman addressed the group. She appeared older, with her glasses slipping down her nose, and spoke with a steady voice. "I don't want another apology," she stated. "I want policies. I want change that doesn't wait for the next viral video." The room acknowledged her sentiment, understanding precisely what she meant. They understood because they had witnessed the repercussions when someone believes their badge provides immunity from accountability. Reality entered the room, presenting itself with the authority of a judge. This wasn't a fabricated narrative. There were no 11th-hour collapses, no sensational admissions. Instead, it was the gradual decline of an individual from a position of high regard, and the subsequent, equally deliberate effort to construct something more substantial in its place. The confines of that courtroom would forever remember the events that transpired within them. The initial impact might diminish. The media attention may dissipate, but the underlying principle endured. Unfettered power can become destructive. A lack of expression can carry more weight than vocal protest. And genuine justice doesn't require a forceful declaration to be acknowledged. What lessons can we draw from these observations? Perhaps it's that a person's true nature invariably emerges when no one appears to be observing, when a feeling of invulnerability takes hold, or when a facade falls away in a moment that cannot be retrieved. Tiffany established a dominion based on intimidation. Judge Kelly cultivated his standing through composure. Only one of them presently holds a position in the setting, ultimately, that embodies justice. Should this account prompt reflection, evoke emotion, or simply inspire a moment of consideration, please subscribe to the channel. We share narratives that others hesitate to explore, with truth as our guiding principle.